Do you guys want to hear about something illegal?
This is Crazy Kong. This is a game that should be put down. So why am I showing off a clearly bootleg version of Donkey Kong? Because I'm not! This is, or was at least, a completely legitimate game licensed from Nintendo and produced by a third party, Falcon Inc. Nintendo had found success with Donkey Kong and was making money hand over fist, but was unprepared for just how big of a hit they actually had. They were selling so many cabinets worldwide that domestic production couldn't keep up, and they needed help. So, they enlisted a number of companies to manufacture and sell Donkey Kong boards for a licensing fee. Given that Donkey Kong would go on to make nearly $200 million in less than a year, I'd want in on that too. Among these companies were other arcade giants, Taito and Sega, but also Falcon. Falcon was authorized to repurpose Crazy Climber boards to create their own version of Donkey Kong, thus the Crazy. And they were perfectly legitimate, even if they looked, sounded, and played janky as hell. But with these licensing agreements came some guidelines. They could only manufacture so many copies, and they definitely were not allowed to export them internationally and eat into Nintendo of America's sales. Guess what Falcon did? According to Nintendo, not only did Falcon produce many more times than the agreed upon amount, but they also exported Crazy Kong, and it then was acquired by the US-based company Elcon. Elcon would go on to then build the cabinets and sell the assembled machines across the states. Nintendo has never been apathetic to copyright law, and thus NOA sued Elcon, and Nintendo of Japan filed an injunction against Falcon. They ended up winning both cases and decided to keep all production on their next game in-house. So, with all that context out of the way, what even is this? This is Crazy Kong, baby! If you plug your ears and squint a little, you could mistake this for Donkey Kong. I mean, you've got a Kong, a lady, and man who jumps. What else do you need? More than this. I mean, right off the bat, the color palette is just disgusting. Taking the red construction girders and replacing them with a radioactive green. The character sprites are sickly gray or way too pale, and while most of the sprites appear to be straight copies from Donkey Kong, the Kong himself has certain frames redrawn, erasing the cute innocence in DK's face and replacing it with an almost rabid ferocity. The blood red in the eyes and mouth and the extra detail in the musculature just really makes this unpleasant. But the unpleasantness doesn't end there, as soon as you put a quarter in, you're greeted with this awful rendition of the classic arcade tune, and then another recolor into like a mossy ape. As Mario begins his ascent, there's no music. However, that's probably a good thing given what we got a taste of at the beginning. What we have instead is a pained scream whenever Mario jumps. Every single time. This is a platformer, a reskin of the platformer. You do it a lot. Getting further into the game doesn't really help any. All of the sound effects are incredibly grating, and each time you complete a stage, you get probably the worst jingle of them all. One of the weirdest quirks to me is that when Mario dies, the sprite colors flip. So the first time I saw this, I thought he just sprouted a dog head. It looks weird. Completing the game, it ends just like the original. Mario pulls the rivets out from under Crazy Kong, and he falls to his doom. Although you can just walk right through them in this one, so it's a lot easier. But you want to know the worst part of this whole game? They made a sequel! Yeah, so in my research, I couldn't find if this was created prior to Falcon losing the license, but the copyright at the beginning of the game is 1981, and the license agreement wasn't terminated until the end of January in 82. So I think this was an official release, although they could have just left that sprite in from part 1. I don't know. Although already this game is an improvement. I mean, for one thing, we get a fully animated cutscene of Crazy busting out of a cage that I can only presume Mario put him in at the end of the last one. Starting it up, and we can also immediately see an improvement in that I can stand to look at it. The colors in this are much closer to the original, even if some of the sprites are still a little wonky. The music is still awful though, so there's no break there. It plays pretty much exactly the same as Donkey Kong. Anecdotally, I noticed it to be a little bit harder, although I'm not sure if that's because it was or if the sound was just too distracting. And after beating the game, it does have slightly more difficult levels on the loop. You gotta jump over this little gap now. That's neat. That's it. That's the only change. So, whatever happened to Falcon? Well, they did continue to make a few arcade games, including a Mahjong game, and of course, Crazy Kong Jr. You might have guessed that Nintendo did not authorize them to make DK Jr. knockoffs, so these were wholly illegal. So on top of the lawsuits from the first game, they were then charged with piracy of Donkey Kong Jr. The president of Falcon was then arrested in 1983, and the trial lasted until March of 1990, where he was found guilty and was sentenced to 32 months of prison. Anyway, that's my overview of Crazy Kong's Part 1 and 2. Definitely not the worst Donkey Kong clones I ever played. Even better than some of the ones that didn't have their official status revoked, like the 2600 port. That said, I still can't recommend playing it outside of as a curiosity. It's close enough to the original DK and gameplay, and the sound effects and music are so loud and awful that I think it might have given me tinnitus. The history behind it, though, is something that I just find really fascinating. There aren't many full arcade cabinets that I've ever wanted to collect, but honestly, this might be one of them. It's just a neat piece of history and a novelty of owning a game that is, for all intents and purposes, a bootleg, but was officially sanctioned and requested to be created by Nintendo. It's just kind of neat, even if I would have to keep it muted the whole time. So, what's my gimmick? Canonical status. Are Crazy Kong Part 1 and 2 canon?